my name is Jordan Edmondson, and today I'm going to be discussing animal testing. For my visual aid, I wanted to use another picture of my dog because I cannot fathom any of these testing being done on her and this harm being done on her. In the United States in 2016, 820,812 animals were said to be used in lab research. This doesn't include animals such as mice, rats, and fish because they're excluded from the U.S. Animal Welfare Act. And 1% of these animals are thought to be dogs and cats. I'm sure a lot of y'all have dogs or cats or rabbits or had them when you were growing up, and I know I can't imagine any of these things being done on my dogs. So can you imagine any of these things being done on your animals? Today I'll be discussing the history of animal testing, some of the harm that's done to the animals, and some of the changes that people are trying to bring about to prevent animal testing. I'll begin with the history of animal testing. Although animal testing has improved a lot in the past couple years, it still has a long way to go. In ancient times, typically in Greece, animals were used as exploratory tests so that people could learn more about the anatomy of the body. It was believed back then that animals had a similar structure as humans, and anything that animals did, humans did too. The most common animal used back then was dogs, and painkillers weren't a thing. So these dogs were typically alive and awake, and tests were being done on them simply out of curiosity. There was a Greek researcher named Galen, and he was the first one to perform any cardiopulmonary or brain and spinal testing in order to determine if animals functioned just like humans. And he would also use dogs to try to help his students learn more about the functions of the body. So for example, they would get a dog, put it on a table, and the students would gather around and they would remove organ by organ to determine the function of each organ. So after removal, they would see the way the dog acted, and they even went so far as to do this in the brain. So they would damage parts of the brain in order to see how the dog acted afterward. There was even one such case where one of his students took a puppy from a mother's womb for no reason and inflicted some harm on him just to see how the mother reacted. This was done, a lot of the students saw this as an act of love from the mother because she showed so much passion toward her dog and she wanted him to be safe, and they didn't think about the fact that this was being done just because they wanted to have a little fun with it, not for any scientific reason. In the United States, animal testing was typically done by pharmaceutical companies to test drugs before they were presented to the public. This happened because in 1937, a drug was produced by a company that was supposed to cure strep. And at first, it wasn't known that there was a poisonous solvent in the drug, but when the chemist who was producing the drug found out, he simply took some raspberry flavoring, added it to the drug, and still sent it to the masses. So once the drug was produced, it mass poisoned so many people, and over 100 people died from it. And after this, the Federal Act of 1938 was produced and regulated that said that all drugs had to be tested on animals before they could be produced to the public. Even with this act, in the late 1950s, early 1960s, a drug was produced that was said to help insomnia, coughs, colds, headaches, and morning sickness in pregnant women. So with this drug, over 46 states were affected by it, and so many children were born with missing limbs or malfunctioning limbs, abnormalities of the limbs. So even despite this drug being tested on animals before it was produced and sent to the public, it still harmed people. This just goes to show that what affects animals doesn't always affect people in the same way, and vice versa. Just because something isn't harmful to dogs or any other animal doesn't mean it's not going to harm humans. The United States has come a long way, like I noted earlier. A lot of states have tried to implement more laws to make animal testing more humane. And a lot of researchers try to practice the 3 R's, which is to reduce the amount of animals used in animal testing, to refine the ways that these animals are tested upon, and to replace animals with non-living subjects. So now that I've discussed some of the history, I want to talk about some of the ways in which these animals are actually harmed. These animals are commonly left in cages or empty structures at all times unless they're being tested on, and they're left with no pleasure. They are not always fed well because the researchers don't want to spend extra money on providing food and nutrition to the dogs. So unless the study requires them to be really healthy, they're just left to fend for themselves or sit there all day without anything. And like I said, they don't have painkillers because they don't want to spend money on that either. The dogs are typically drowned, burned, blinded. They are injected with harmful chemicals. They are around toxic substances that cause them to have brain damage. They're purposely made to seize. There are so many things that happen, and commonly once the testing is done, these dogs are either put down or they die because of the test anyway. There are a lot of things that can be done to avoid the pain that's inflicted upon these animals. Lots of people, or lots of scientists, have started to do in vitro testing or computer modeling techniques. Many human volunteers are used, and computer dummies that act as humans that bleed, breathe, die, and act better and act in more ways that are similar to real humans than animals do. 90% of drugs fail even after passing an animal test, and a lot of animals don't, or most all animals, aren't susceptible to the same diseases that humans are, like Alzheimer's disease, schizophrenia, many types of heart disease, many kinds of cancer. So the drugs that should be being produced and being created in order to cure the most problematic diseases in humans can't actually be tested in positive ways. So with all of this being said, it's really important to go through the history and review it and decide for yourself whether you think this is okay. So many companies have started to either not test on animals at all because they don't want to get rid of the part of the public that thinks this is wrong, or they have just started to practice more humane kinds of animal testing. That way they avoid some of the backlash from it. And even other companies don't care at all about how animals are affected in their testing, so they test their products on them anyway. Like I noted earlier, there are a lot of people that are trying to regulate laws for animal regulation and animal rights, and PETA is an animal protection agency that has a lot of information. So you can go online to their website and you can put a product in, and it'll tell you whether they use animal testing and the harm that the animal testing does to the animal, and whether the product inflicts pain upon the animal or not. You can also Google any random company that you use on a day-to-day basis, and they should give you information. It's ethically right for them to give you the information on whether or not they use animal testing. So just to review, I did go over the history and I stated some harmful facts on the things that happen to these animals, like them being blinded, them dying, them being choked, drowned, things like that. And to connect it back, I just want to ask, would you want any of these things being done to your animals? Or would you want to be aware that these things do happen to the animals that you keep at your home? And I'm going to leave you with that question. And again, I want to remind you to visit PETA.org, and you can gather more information. And they have a lot of videos that show you some of the malpracticing that's done to animals, and they provide you an in-depth history of the things that have been done to these animals in the past.